Let's continue to talk about the pandemic response, closed borders and xenophobia. We're joined by 6PR host Jane Marwick and host of The Marwick Show. You'll subscribe for the podcast. It is a ripper. Jane, you've been saying for a while that what your state premier is doing in Western Australia is an elimination strategy. It's not learning to live with the virus. That's been made very, very clear this past week.
It has indeed. I first heard him say we've eliminated the virus on Sunday, and really very disparaging about Gladys Berejiklian and what happens in New South Wales. And there you are, he has said it again today, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, he says that Gladys Berejiklian has got it wrong. We've got the economy opened up as much as possible, people giving their names and details when they go to pubs and restaurants and whatever, so that you can contact trace and trying to make life as normal as possible. He says that's wrong. He just wants to keep everything shut out and keep the virus out of his state.
Yes, he does. And I can tell you that people here are afraid. I keep coming across people, particularly older people, who were terrified that the borders were going up over the weekend. Older people in tears. The message of fear, the message that this virus will absolutely kill you and kill people in the streets has been such an effective and powerful one with very little pushback that people are utterly, utterly terrified. I was just talking to a lady now about South Australia and she said, oh, look, you know, this is absolutely terrifying, and get those borders up again. And it has translated, Chris, into, I heard you say xenophobia. I want to read you a message that I tweeted yesterday. It is on Marketplace, which is like Gumtree on Facebook. A woman who is moving from Darwin to Western Australia said, I messaged a lady on Marketplace in Perth about a piece of furniture, and she replied, I don't support interstate people moving to WA, so I'm not selling you my furniture. That is how things are here. Now, bear in mind, our tourism is down $200 million a month. We can't get workers into the regions. The Premier has previously said, please move to Western Australia. You had Jeff Moss on yesterday who is trying, and then at 1 o'clock this morning got rejected. That's a whole other story. We need people here who will work, and yet people in Western Australia view them as carriers of the plague, Chris. It's terrible.
It's extraordinary, and it's an attitude reflected around the country, and you're right, the key is fear. And I think the media has a lot of culpability here. We keep talking about coronavirus infections as if every one of them is a death sentence, when we know that precisely the opposite is true. With most people, the infection will be mild and maybe even asymptomatic. Now, sure, we've got to look after the vulnerable and not be overwhelmed by the virus, but perspective is everything.
Yeah, perspective is absolutely everything. And we do have to, none of us denies that in vulnerable communities this virus is damaging. However, I can tell you it is also incredibly hard for people. So Jeff, who you had on your program yesterday, got rejected at 1:30 this morning because he was going to be travelling through South Australia, except he had changed his G2G pass yesterday to say, don't worry, I won't drive, I'll leave all my chattels behind, I'll fly in. Now, what really worries me, Chris, is that if you're good at filling in forms, you can somehow get through the system. If you're not, and let's face it, there are a lot of people whose form filling and literacy isn't their greatest strength. So now what I'm seeing here in Western Australia is also the inequality, if you like, for more blue-collar workers who keep getting left behind, dads who can't see their children, people who have got very real needs to get into this state, and piled on with the xenophobia, it is a terrible state of affairs.
Great stories and great insight, Jane. Thanks for sharing them.
Thank you for having me.
Jane Marwick there. You can get her podcast, The Marwick Show, The Jane Marwick Show, on all the normal places you get these podcasts. So bad luck this week. She's chatting to me in isolation, in quarantine. But it's a ripper podcast. Subscribe to it every week.